Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and today I am really excited for my interview with Andrew McFadden, who's the founder of Panoramic Financial Advice, which he founded in 2014 in Fresno, California. Andrew has had a more, quote-unquote, traditional path into financial planning than many of our guests, which started with him getting a degree in business, then getting his MBA so he could learn more about the financial planning space after doing an internship at an RIA right after undergrad. He worked as a stock analyst for 4 years before moving over to an RIA that primarily focused on investment management, and he actually built out the financial planning process to the point that he got them listed as a top 10 wealth management firm in the U.S., according to one list. So he eventually saw, however, that he wasn't going to be able to do financial planning the way he thought was best for his ideal client, so he started his own RIA. Now, Andrew was generous and opened up about some really trying times that he and his wife had personally around the time he was launching his firm, which I think is important to hear because it reminds us that, it's not really all rainbows and unicorns when you start a business. We ended the episode then with a deep dive into his niche marketing strategy, which has propelled his business in ways that he didn't expect. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/62. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. You can interact with other listeners, ask guest questions, and more. So without further ado, here is my interview with Andrew. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the show, man. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alan. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you have a huge announcement, so I am thrilled that we were able to squeeze this interview in because you have baby number 2 on the way, it sounds like.
Yeah, we do. We're about a month out now, and so, kind of any day we're walking on eggshells wondering when this baby's going to...
I thought I was going to be CCing your wife, being like, please let me have him this month because for the next 6 months, you're not going to let me have him for a recording. So
Right, pretty much. So you're squeezing it in just in time.
That's it. So the diaper bag is packed. The car seat is in the car.
Sure. Not quite. I've had too many client meetings going on, but hopefully in the next week or so.
That is a good problem to have. So we'll definitely talk more about that. But let's just kind of kick things off. Let's start at the beginning like we normally do. So how did you kind of get into financial planning? What has been your career path into this profession?
Yeah, I think it kind of started when I was growing up as a teenager. My dad was really into finance and investing, and he had a buddy that he went to high school with that worked at Merrill Lynch and was kind of helping him with his, portfolio and trading stocks and different things. And so whenever my dad had free time, whether it was on vacation or at home, he'd kind of pull out his yellow notepad and start jotting down numbers. And whenever I'd walk by, he'd love to share it with me. And so that kind of, I think, sparked my interest in money. As time went on, as I was going through high school, just kind of different experiences kind of piqued my interest, and there were bad experiences. So both of my grandmas had just financial advisors that had taken advantage of them in different ways, and which was upsetting for the family. And then in 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, my dad, who had been working with his buddy for several years now, saw his account go from, somewhere just around 100,000 down to about 45. And one of his holdings, he had $15,000 in like a penny stock that went bankrupt. And that obviously really hurt him because he had a high level of trust in his friend. And I think it was really that really started to get me interested in wanting to know, well, how do you make good stock picks? And, how do you make money and how do you treat people right in this industry? And so from there, I just kind of progressed through school, through college, and got a undergrad in business and started to learn a little bit about it. In 2005, I started working at Washington Mutual Bank, which has since been acquired by Chase. But through that, I kind of learned more of the product side of the business and worked closely with the investment team in our branch and started to learn different things there. It was in 2006 that I think I made the decision that this was actually the industry I really wanted to work in. And I got the opportunity to intern at a registered investment advisory firm at that time, and just saw that the different side of the business and how that they, charge by the fee only standard and not on a commission. And I just really liked that model. And so I think it was at that point that I decided, hey, I want to pursue a career in this industry.
I think that's really interesting. How did you, most people that have a job no longer think about internships, right? Internships are for high school and college kids. So how did you make the decision to do an internship after you had already started your career, and how did you even find them?
Yeah, you know what? I was still in college. I had finished my undergrad degree, and so I was in the summer of 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. And these were the new folks that my parents were working with. And so after my dad had felt like he got burned by his friend that worked at Merrill Lynch, he went out for like a year and tried to find somebody that he felt like he could trust. And he stumbled across these guys that had an RIA, and just, it really resonated with him, obviously, of like, hey, yeah, we don't charge commissions and we just charge a % of assets, but here's our strategy. We don't just like make stock picks. We invest in these things called mutual funds, and we try to diversify you, and just everything they were saying. My dad was like, that is great. That's what I want to be a part of. So it was actually with that same firm that I got an internship with, because, we had connections with them. And it was during my time there. So I was there for like a couple months over the summer. I decided, wow, this is what I want to do. And so I chose to go back to school in the fall and get my MBA to just learn more about finance, because at that point I had just had my minor in business. And so I think I had taken like 2 finance classes. So I really wanted to increase the level of like knowledge and education I had in that area before I jumped in full-fledged with a firm that did that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so you worked Washington Mutual while in school, and then did the RIA internship kind of at the end of undergrad, and then kind of jump back in for the MBA in order to get additional education, just because you kind of realized this was the path for you.
Exactly. And I stayed working at Washington Mutual this whole time. So the first year of my MBA, I was working at Washington Mutual probably 20 or 30 hours a week, and then, going to class. And then my second year of my MBA, I was just like, man, if I keep taking 2 classes a semester, it's going to take me 3 or 4 years to get done with this. So I actually left the job at Washington Mutual the fall of 2007, and I just went full-time at school to finish up by that next spring 2008. So I just kind of blitzed through it at that point.
All right. So spring 2008, you're ready to graduate. Fantastic time to get a job in financial planning, particularly the end of that year. So,
yep.
Well, I guess before we move on, do you feel like the MBA was what you hoped it would be in terms of education? Because, that's a pretty big commitment to go back to school for 2-3 years and be working part-time while doing this. Like, that's a huge deal for a couple of years. Like, are you glad you did it?
Yeah, I think there's 2 sides of that. I'm definitely glad I did it. I wanted to learn more about finance, and I've always kind of had this teaching mentality. I thought I was going to be maybe a part-time professor or instructor at a college, and so I knew I had to at least have my master's to be able to do that. And so I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I got the letters behind my name. But the part that I guess I would have done things differently if I could go back is I would have had more of that real world career experience, because I didn't really know how to apply what I was learning, because I hadn't really worked for an investment firm. I was only on the like account opening side for the bank. And so it was a lot of new info for me that I was just like, wow, this is great. Okay, I don't know how it applies though. So.
That makes sense, because our COO of XY Planning Network is going back for his MBA. And one of the things that I'm thrilled about is that the entire program is based around your existing firm that you work for. And so he's going to go take an operations class and then be able to do like case studies and projects and all that on the XY Planning Network operations. And I think that's
wow, okay.
Because it's like so applied. Some might argue too applied, because it's just focusing on our one company. But I could see that with an MBA. I had my master's, so did not have any, the difference between master's and MBA is like night and day. It just means we both have letters after our name and stayed in school a couple extra years. But right. I can definitely see the value of seeing that with some real world experience, or while you're getting real world experience at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it is what it is. And I'm still glad that I did it.
Cool. And there are a few MBA programs in financial planning out there, not very many. I think Georgia State had one. They may still out of Atlanta. And I know there's a few out there, but it sounds like your MBA was actually in finance. So probably heavy on the investment accounting side. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much like the corporate finance side of things. I did try to take any investment class that was offered. So I'm from Fresno, California. I went to Fresno State, just kind of stayed home because that was the easier thing to do financially. But yeah, I was definitely more focused on like balance sheets and income statements and kind of financial analysis, not so much on investing, but I did take a couple investing classes.
All right. So you get your MBA and then what? I'm certain, young guy with an MBA coming out of Fresno State, highly recruitable. So I guess what was your path from there?
Yeah, so my plan was go hire with an RIA or financial planning firm. But I actually got a really unique opportunity so the last 3 months I was finishing my MBA, I interned at a company called the Applied Finance Group. And they actually do stock valuation. They have their own valuation model, which is kind of based on like an economic kind of valuation, and did my internship there, really kind of just appreciated the experience. And when I was done, they offered me a job to be their tech analyst. And so I said, hey, I'm probably never going to get this kind of opportunity again. So I jumped on it and I started working as a stock analyst straight out of my MBA.
Wow. All right. So were you actually doing any work with clients at that point, or was it primarily just on the analysis kind of data-driven side?
Yeah, completely kind of back office. So we would provide service for financial advisory firms across the U.S. I think the advisory firms that were our clients had combined over $50 billion in assets. So we had a lot of good sized clients when you looked at it from afar. I didn't have tons of interaction with them. What my job was to analyze mainly the large cap tech market, so all the tech companies in the S&P 500, and to do reports and to make recommendations. And I think I needed to recommend like 9 of the 70 tech companies that were in there. Our goal was to pick obviously the ones that were going to outperform kind of the sector as a whole. And so, yeah, I would do that. I would do valuation. I would write research reports every quarter when there was like special news announcements from the company or surprises or whatever that may be. I would also write reports and send out, market releases and different things like that. So I was very much, I kind of like to think of myself as a Wall Street analyst, although I wasn't that glorified, but I was definitely doing that kind of work.
So you're monitoring 70 companies and then trying to kind of filter them down to the top 9 that y'all would invest in. Is that? Yeah.
So we had, at that time, I think we had 4 analysts that covered all the sectors. I think there were 9 sectors in the market at that time. My biggest one was tech. I think I also did telecom, which was very small. And then I shared industrials with another analyst. So altogether, I had to be recommending 14 stocks at any given time.
Dude, I know CFAs that can hardly keep up with 20 companies that they're analyzing, much less
I know.
100. That's incredible.
Well, and then talk about being thrown into the fire. So like you mentioned, I started right in June of 2008. Just at the the worst time. And I was still very naive at that point. I was thinking, okay, I can do good at this. If I do my research, I'm going to find the right stocks that are going to go up. Well, as you know, nothing goes up during a down market. And so I kind of learned the hard way that, during down markets, everything goes down for the most part. But at the same time, good stock analysis isn't about trying to call the stocks that will go up during down markets. It's calling the stocks that are going to outperform kind of the index or the benchmark as a whole. So in that time, it's trying to find the tech stocks that aren't going down as much as the whole sector. So that was a really good learning experience for me, even though it was really tough to kind of jump into at that point.
No kidding. I guess the whole time you're thinking, thank you for not giving me, the housing sector. Like,
right. The financials, right?
goals, like, oh, I'm down 80%. I'm winning.
Exactly.
So, all right. So you get there in 2008. You are there for the tank. Did you hang out past the bottom, or were y'all able to survive the market downturn?
Yeah, we're actually very kind of recession resistant, if you could say, because our clients kind of wasn't so much based on their assets, but they were paying us kind of a straight fee for the research and analysis. So we had a couple clients leave us probably because they went out of business, but for the most part, whereas other financial advisory firms might have seen their revenues drop 30 or 40%, I think our revenues dropped like 4%. So we did just fine. It was more from the mental, emotional side, if anything, that it was kind of tough trudging through that. But as soon as March 2009 hit, everything was on its way back up. Then it was kind of an interesting time. So I actually stayed there through May of 2012. So I was there for 4 years and got a really good dose of what it is like to be an analyst and what it's like to do research, on just from the stock level, not the mutual fund level or bonds or anything like that, but just specific stocks in a sector.
So I'm curious to know if you've kind of brought over any of the skills that you learned during that time with stock analysis into your existing firm, which we'll talk about the path to get to now owning your own firm. But are you still doing stock analysis and that sort of thing for your clients?
I don't. So here's my big takeaway from that experience. It's that work is so tough. It requires so much time that I kind of developed this belief that I don't understand how some advisors think that they can do stock analysis, let alone almost even mutual fund analysis, and serve their clients all at the same time. I'm just like, how do you have the hours in the day to do both of those jobs well? And so my takeaway was, I'm going to go to a firm or I'm going to start my own firm, and either we're going to have somebody in-house do that or we're going to outsource it. And so that was kind of my big takeaway there.
Yeah, I mean, you said there were 4 analysts that are full-time salaried experts with master's degrees and experience that are all they're doing is the S&P 500, much less all the other stocks that are out there that you could be investing in. So like it's an immense job to try to monitor 20, 30, 50, 100 positions, much less the entire market.
Right. It's so much work. And you put it exactly right. That's just the S&P 500 that we were covering. But, there's a global market. We have small companies, international. We have the bond market, commodity, it's endless.
It's too much. Yeah.
So it's really unreasonable to think that you can be this stockbroker of like the 50s that can make all the calls yourself and, and make good calls, so.
Well, I'm not sure the stockbrokers in the 50s were making good calls. They just made a lot of calls and a lot of sales.
Right. We only hear the stories of the ones that were successful and lucky.
Exactly. Okay, so 2012, is that when you decided to branch off into your own thing, or did you get a different job after this firm?
Yeah, so I didn't go out on my own at that point. More or less, I was just burnt out. I'd been talking to my wife and just saying, you know what, I think I'm ready to transition out of this. But I didn't have anything set up. I had actually, a few months before I left, had gone around town and just given my resume to all the RIAs here to just see if there was any opportunities. And sure enough, nobody was looking for anybody at that time. They were just kind of at the point where it's like, man, we've just almost recovered from, the market crash of 2008. We still aren't in a place to hire. And so I got a lot of, oh, your resume is really impressive, but we just don't have a spot for you. And so I decided to just kind of quit and trust that something would come up. And sure enough, within a couple months, I approached what was the largest fee-only RIA here in Fresno at the time and just kind of said, hey, could we come up with something creative here where you guys could kind of ease my way in or whatever? I'd really like an opportunity and I think I'd do really good. And so it kind of piqued their interest and they started talking and they're like, yeah, we could probably come up with some kind of role for you. And so in August, we had like formal discussions and tried to build kind of a working agreement. And I think October of 2012, I was officially hired in kind of this service role where I would help they had at that time 3 advisors where I would just kind of be their support staff, help them with report preparation, administration, things like that. So,
it's such a good point to make, though, that position was not sitting there. It had not been posted online and you went and applied to the position and went through the normal process. Like, you really hustled for that, even though you're kind of downplaying it a little bit. Like, that took hustle and it took effort and it took the willingness to hear the word no, which none of us really like to hear,
right.
In order to just go sit down and say, like, hey, I'm a rock star. You should hire me and make a position for me. And they did.
Right. And, it was a lesson in that. It wasn't easy, kind of putting yourself out there and kind of being vulnerable. But the advice that people say, like, what's the worst they could tell you? They could just say no. If you practice that, it's really true. It's like, what do I have to lose at this point? And so I threw myself out there, and sure enough, they created something for me.
This is a less extreme example that I remember Kitsis, I believe back in episode 1, he talks about that when he was a life insurance salesman, which many of us forget is where his former life was. His insurance trainer told him, go buy a really big house and an expensive car because those payments will force you to get, to beat the ground trying to sell products because you got to make money.
Uh-huh.
And you saying that kind of reminds me of that a little bit with you quit your job, you put yourself in a position of you had to hustle. You couldn't just sit back on your heels and just wait for something to show up. You put yourself in a position of actually having to go find something. Sounds like actually worked out.
Yeah, and I'm that kind of personality where, you'll see when I start my own firm, it's the same thing. I kind of need to put myself in that position and challenge myself to kind of maximize my potential. So
no, it makes perfect sense. So, okay, so you go work for this other firm, and did you move into and kind of learn the lead planner role at that point? Did you ever actually have an opportunity to work with clients while you were there?
Yeah, so they were a pure, old school RIA. It was all about investment analysis, not so much about financial planning. They said they would do financial planning for clients, and they had, money tree software, but really it was reactive, and they didn't have this way of going through that wealth management process for clients. It was really just getting them into portfolios and doing the annual review or semi-annual review. And so as I came on, I started working towards getting my CFP. And as I was doing that, I was like, man, we need to be doing more of this kind of thing for clients. And they're like, yeah, go for it. Create these processes and do this stuff. And so I really tried to tackle that the best I could. And within a year, we had started establishing really good processes within the firm to help people with their financial planning and retirement planning. And it really started to, I think, create new business for us because clients were happy. It freed the partners up to go get more business. But I think the satisfied clients were also telling their friends about it because we were getting more referrals. And we had a really good year of growth in 2013 because of that. So yeah, at the end of the day, I kind of progressed into this financial planning role. And they also gave me some incentives to try to bring on clients of my own. But what I found after that year was that I really didn't have any time to go get clients of my own. And so I was just doing all the support and financial planning work for the partners.
So you essentially, had the opportunity to build out an entire planning platform at a firm. From scratch, it sounds like.
Yes. I didn't have any background in this, so it was kind of raw at first. And we were using money tree software, which, knowing what I know now, I'm like, I wouldn't.
Sorry to money tree people, but ooh.
Yeah, just so much input. It was ridiculous. And, with the 50-page output, of course, and it was ugly, to put it honest. But we still made it work, and it was better than what our clients had at any point in the past. But as time went on, a little bit on the structure for my incentives to bring on new clients, and I don't know how this compared with other firms, but they kind of told me, if I brought on new clients in terms of assets, that I would get whatever revenues for that first year were brought in, and they'd split it into thirds and pay me over 3 years. So if I brought on a $1 million client and we charged 1%, that's $10,000. I'd get $3,300 a year for the next 3 years. And then that was it. I wouldn't get any ongoing past that. And in my head, I was like, you know what? I should get paid for this indefinitely, I feel, if I continue to service the client, because that was my role. So that was always kind of strange to me, but I went with it. At the end of the day, I only brought on, a couple decent sized clients that I got paid for because I was so busy with the financial planning end. And I started getting to that point where I'm like, okay, so kind of rewind here. The salary they started me at was $34,000 a year. So it wasn't much, but it was kind of just to get my foot in the door. And so I started to talk to them a year later and say, hey, look at what all I've done and look at how our firm's doing. I think I should be getting paid more. And whether you want me to keep doing financial planning and support, that's fine. But if that's the case, you're going to have to pay me a much bigger salary, or you're going to have to free up my time to go get more clients. And so they talked, and they basically created more work for me and said, we'll bump your salary up to $40,000 a year. But if you hit these certain standards for how well you're doing on reports and stuff like that, you could make a potential amount of 55, which for me, it was enough of a carrot to like say, okay, that's great. But as I found, so that was around August of 2013. By December of 2013, I was already unhappy again, thinking these guys are probably making $200,000-$300,000 a year. And yet I feel like I'm doing all the work here and getting paid pennies on the dollar. And so that was the point in time where I think I started to get unsatisfied and think, is staying here long-term what's right for me, or should I go out on my own?
And that is such a tough decision when you're standing there, because they're making great money. They built the firm, though. They, spent a lot of decades probably getting to that point. And yet, like, now they're turning over this massive, project to you. You're owning it and still not getting paid for it. So I think a lot of people are in that position of trying to make the decision of what do you do? How do you move up or over or out? And I guess any wisdom for folks that are in that position and how you made that decision?
Yeah. So kind of the timeline there. So we're sitting at January 2014, and the partners had their meeting to kind of start the year and said, what are we going to do this next year? And they invited me in for that. And I was like, great, here's my opportunity to kind of voice my my frustrations and try to inspire change. And for me, there's a few things that were kind of bugging me internally about our firm as well. So my boss, sometime that year, had told me about this guy, Michael Kitsis, that had 18 letters behind his name. And
that's an understatement. I think it's more like 30, but yeah.
Maybe at that time it was 18. I don't know. But he's like, yeah, this guy writes these great articles. They're kind of complex. Sometimes I don't even understand them, but I think it'd be really good for you to start reading them. And so I did. And Michael has these articles that kind of talk about more of the modern day financial planning firm and how things are evolving. And I started to see that and be like, wow, our firm is nothing like that. Like, everything we do is with paper. Our compliance department says we can't do like any advertising. We have no social media presence. We do nothing online. We have a website with a lighthouse, go figure. And it's just like everything we were doing was so archaic and we hadn't changed in 20 years. And I'm starting to think, okay, if I want to stay here, not only do I want to get paid more, but I want a firm that's actually keeping up with the time. And so we had that meeting, and my goal was to go in there and just to say, hey, here's what I see our firm can do, and here's what I'd like to do to kind of help you guys get there. Pretty much that meeting, I didn't get to say a word, and all they did was talk and assign more tasks to me. And that was just my tipping point. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work. And so I went home and I told my wife that day, and I was like, look, I don't know where we're going to be in a few months here, but I just don't see myself staying with this firm for very much longer. And coincidentally, it was like later that month that I read Sophia Berra's article on Kits's blog that talked about going out on her own for $10,000. And I was like, holy cow, I need to do this. For that kind of cost, we had that much in savings. I was like, I think we can make this work. And so I was just so inspired when I read Sophia's article, and I started trying to just map out how I could do that and what that would look like. But in the meantime, I also wanted to not just give up full-fledged. I really started talking to the one partner that I thought was the most reasonable of the three, and just kind of explaining my frustrations and what I wanted to see happen to the firm. But it was kind of a take it or leave it kind of position I had at that point, where if this doesn't happen, I just don't see myself staying here. And so I tried to negotiate with him for a couple months there, but at the end of the day, when it didn't work out in May of 2014, I left them and I went out to start my own firm.
So May of 2014, so just over 2 years ago. The one thing I want to circle back on real quick and just ask, did you say you were working on your CFP while at this RIA? When did you actually handle all the education requirement and sit for the exam?
Yeah, so I was working on the CFP throughout 2013, and I sat for the exam November of 2013, and I passed. And then it took a little bit of time to kind of get my experience requirement checked out. So I think I actually had the letters either in May or June of that year once I had gone out on my own.
Oh, that's funny. And I do wonder if that plays any part in it, to be able to, to feel like, okay, well, I passed the exam, I've got the credentials and the designation and the education, the experience and all that to empower you a little bit to feel like, all right, I think I can do this on my own instead of just doing it for someone else.
Yes, definitely. That's kind of how I felt this whole time was, man, I have an MBA, I have a CFP, and I'm doing great work for these, multi-million-dollar clients that are super happy. I should be getting more rewarded for this and more acknowledged for this. And I did. I just saw the potential. I was like, man, if I could just get a few of these clients on my own, how long would it take me before I could make what I'm making here? So it was kind of that incentive. One other thing that was really interesting at this time was we actually got on, CNBC's top fee-only RIA list that they put out every year. My firm was actually number 10
Oh, wow.
on that list the month that I left, which was a huge thing. And, they were thrilled about it. And I'm sure they thought I had nothing to do with it. But kind of the proof in the pudding that I felt like finally justified was the next year. So in 2015, when those rankings came out again, I think they dropped all the way to like number 67 or something.
There you go.
And I was like, finally, my vindication.
Too funny. All right. So you decide to go solo May 2014. I guess talk us through that process. I mean, what did that look like to go out and just try to do it on your own? And I guess who were you thinking would be your initial wave of first clients?
Yeah. So that was, obviously a very tough time, just trying to navigate that. But I loved what Sophia had written, and I kind of was like, this is going to be my guide. I'm going to use this as my jumping off point. I'm going to research all these, different softwares and folks that she worked with, but then I'm going to do my own research and try to pull another couple good candidates in each area and try to figure out what is the best for me. And so over June and July, I did a lot of research. I decided, kind of in line with my earlier thoughts that I wasn't going to do the investment side on my own. So I researched a bunch of third-party management firms, and I settled on these guys named Frontier Asset Management. And they had worked with Regency, my old firm, a little bit in a consulting basis. So I kind of knew a bit about them. And just the more that I talked with them, the more that I liked what they did. Their strategy, their fee structure was really reasonable. And so I chose to do that and to focus on the financial planning with my time for my clients. I worked to get registered at that point, and I got registered in no time. I worked with CS2 compliance on that, and I think they had me registered in like 8 days.
Oh, wow.
From the time they filed to when I was approved, which was like a record, especially in California.
No kidding. California is notorious for taking a while.
Exactly. I had heard bad rumors about that, so I was pleasantly surprised. So that was August of 2014 that I was officially registered. I had my, investment management set up. And my plan was to be kind of this lean, virtual advisor, very similar to what Sophia had done, and just kind of see how things went. I was planning on doing assets under management for my bigger clients, but then I was also thinking of doing, the monthly retainer model for younger clients, but I didn't really know how that would look. So my first stab at that was, so I come from Fresno. The average income here is not nearly what it is in the big cities. I was looking at my peers and thinking, man, they make like $60,000, $70,000 a year. What's a fee that they're actually going to be able to get behind? And I realized now that I discounted myself way too low, but I was like, what if I charged them a $500 annual retainer? They kind of have a simple life, not tons going on. That should be reasonable. And so I set out with that. which I, came to realize that was way too little for the amount of work I was doing.
Very quickly, you probably realized that. Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have the podcast with one of our most recent episodes on how to price yourself. We would have slapped you for that.
Yeah, that would have been helpful.
Because just in terms of the value you're providing and the hours you're working, just so undervalued. But when you're first starting out, you just want to get those first clients. I think it's very common. I did the same thing, Yeah,
you just don't know how to navigate it until you go through it in a lot of ways. So, I was listening to Anjali's podcast and she said her kind of big regret was kind of taking things too slow and kind of having the perfectionist attitude. And that is very much how I've kind of navigated this. I took things very slow. So even though I was registered in August, I didn't even bring over my first clients till October. And those were just a couple of family members. So people I knew were going to work with me. And that's just because I was very hesitant and wanted to make sure I did everything right the first time. And that ended up being all that I did for that first year. The rest of 2014, I had only taken on those 2 family members because I was working on getting my website up, which took until the very end of December of that year. And so by the time January 1st rolled around of 2015, that's when I really started to go into marketing mode and to tell other people about what I was doing and kind of what my fee structure was and my services were. So in my mind, I really technically started January of 2015.
No, and that makes sense to consider kind of when you hit the ground running. But if that's our start date, then it took you 8 months to go from, I'm going to do this to feeling comfortable hitting the ground running, which I think is helpful because, that timeline, we all go through that, right? Of having a timeline to deal with. So it's good to hear kind of what yours was.
Yeah. And so at that point, I was ready to start marketing and, going out and getting clients. But on the personal side of things, I was dealing with some difficult issues. So as it were, my wife and I at that point in time were not wanting to have kids. And October of 2014, we found out she was pregnant. And, we were kind of shocked by that. But at the same time, we're like, you know what? This is tough. We're going to make this work. And my wife at the time was only working part-time at the local university. So her income was about $20,000 a year, not tons. And we know finances are our big struggle right now, but we still were like, we'll find a way to make this work. Well, December rolled around and my wife went into her doctor's appointment and we got the unfortunate news that the baby didn't make it.
Oh, damn.
So yeah, that was really tough at that time, especially for my wife. It seems like it's always tougher on her end. But so we were trying to navigate through that. And then in January, for whatever reason, I had been getting sick a couple times. It's probably that entrepreneur lifestyle where you're not sleeping much and you're worrying about things. But I started to get really bad anxiety and I'd never dealt with it my whole life. I was always a very positive, optimistic, kind of level-headed guy. And all of a sudden I'm dealing with issues of anxiety and some small panic attacks and things like that. And so just as I'm ready, Alan, to launch my firm and to go into marketing mode, I start dealing with these personal issues.
Everything gets thrown at you at once.
It kind of lasted really badly, the anxiety side of things, through March of that year. And so, yeah, so things aren't always roses when you go out on your own, believe it or not.
No, it's such a good point. And thank you for being willing to share that. Because I know, and listeners have heard me say this before, that we tend to show the rainbows and unicorns side of things. But there's the very real side that life is life. And honestly, shit happens. And there's nothing you can do to plan for a lot of these things that you just have to be able to push through. And the whole, things come in threes. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And it's just amazing how sometimes it feels like they stack up against you. But once you make it through that, it's hard to imagine a situation where you'll have to deal with something that will be harder to go through than that 3-month period that you've already dealt with.
Right. And, I had some things that were going on with my health that were worrying me more than they should have. And sure, the business and just kind of making ends meet financially, that was all weighing on me. But, my wife was a great support through all that time. I think it was a good challenge and just kind of good time for growing through our faith. And so we just we look back on it as it was a really, really difficult time, the most difficult time of our marriage, but also a very fruitful time at the end of things because I feel like we're stronger because of that moment in time. There are a couple things that kind of helped pull me out of it specifically. Number one was in March of that year, I had decided, you know what, I've kind of been through this setup process and I really appreciated Sophia's blog. And so I decided to write my own and kind of just go through the whole same steps. When I was done, I reached out to Michael and I just said, hey, would you like to, feature this on the blog as well? And he was all for it. And that was just, didn't lead to any clients, but it was just a great experience to get that out there and just kind of have a lot of advisors call me or email me and say, hey, great, thank you so much for this. This is really helpful, really inspiring. And it just gave me a really good feeling inside to be able to do that. So.
Yeah, and that's actually how I heard about you. So we'll link to that article on Kitces.com's blog, but it was it was almost like an update to Sophia's on, basically, I guess it would be, 2 years later, a year and a half later, I'm like, and here's what I would do, here's what I did, kind of taking the core of what you did and adding a few things to it. So it's just amazing how helpful that stuff is. And sometimes we forget that just like putting it onto paper is more than most people have ever seen, in terms of all the various components of starting a firm. So in the pre-call before when we were chatting before we started recording, you told me that, 2015 was just a grind and 2016 has been amazing. So walk me through kind of 2015 when it comes to clients and how all that has worked for you. And I guess the 2015, 2016 roller coaster you've been on.
Yeah. So 2015 was tough. I had taken on my 2 family members in 2014. And then all through 2015, I only took on what I call 7 true clients because I had taken on another 5, but they were kind of friends that weren't really paying me my actual fee structure.
Gotcha.
So 7 real clients. So going a whole year and picking up basically a client every 2 months, that's tough, and I was trying to navigate things, and kind of what held me back was, I had those personal struggles the first few months of the year. But also when I had set out to work with young physicians because I had an experience with my old firm where we went to a residency program and spoke, and they all loved us and they came up to us and said, hey, we'd love to work with you. And we're like, okay, that's great. Do you have 100,000 in assets? Because that's our minimum. And they're like, no, we have 100,000 in debt. Does that work? And we're like, yeah, I don't think this is going to work. And that was kind of one of the light bulbs that went off in my head when I was working for Regency was that, hey, if I go out on my own, this is a market that's probably untapped. I should focus on that. And so I had made efforts to do that. But it was in May of 2015 that I was like, you know what, I need to try to go back to that residency program in Fresno and try to see if I can get in to give talks and just get to know them better. And so I reached out to the lady that we had worked with. She was the program director of the internal medicine residency program there. And I got crickets back. I never heard from her. So I decided to reach out to all the program directors. I never heard from any of them. And I was starting to feel a little defeated at that point. But I had known a doctor that I knew went through the program there. And I reached out to her and I said, hey, do you happen to know anybody here? Can you connect me? And she was like, you know what? I actually still teach there on a part-time basis. And I know the chief residents in that program. Let me connect you. And so she connected me to them in June. And believe it or not, how the medical year works is that's the end of kind of their residency is at the end of June. So the chief resident I talked to was like, hey, this is great, although I'm moving next month to the East Coast, so I can't really help you with this. But let me give your name and number to the next chief resident. How about that? And I was like, in the back of my mind, you don't know how important this is to me. Please make sure you do this, and please make sure that they call me. And so I was like, sure, that'd be great. And 3 weeks into July, I hadn't heard from them. So I sent out an email to all 4 chief residents of the department. And a day later, I heard back from one of them and they were like, hey, yeah, we heard about you and we'd love to meet with you. Can we schedule a lunch? And so we scheduled a lunch and we talked. And, to make a long story short, I ended up speaking at that residency program 5 times last year.
Dude, that's incredible.
Which was amazing.
Oh, that's super exciting.
And so again, it's kind of, you got to bat your head against the wall several times before sometimes you break through. And that was just another experience of that. And what the chief resident told me that found me, he's like, you know what? I'm actually surprised your email made it through because we have firewalls that pretty much block anything that's not a .edu or a .gov. So he's like, I'm not even sure why your email made it through, but, thank goodness that it did. So maybe God's hand in that or something, but really happy that it worked out.
And just talk about persistence, because one less email, or, you don't send one of those emails on the last go and, maybe your name never gets picked up, but instead here you are, the reigning financial expert in front of a bunch of resident physicians. Like, that is such an amazing position to be in. And it really does go to show that hard work does pay off. And it just takes a lot of perseverance and just really putting your head down and just pushing forward on stuff.
Yeah. And so that was really helpful. But I got on the White Coat Investor website and I got a profile on there back in June of 2015. And so I started getting calls from prospects through there. And I picked up my first doctor client in April of 2015, but then I picked up 2 resident clients in October of 2015 from White Coat Investors specifically. And I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. It's starting to work. And so I use that as a good learning process. And I'm just starting to, push in a few different areas on the young physician front. And it's kind of at that point that everything that I'm hearing from you and from Kitsis and XYPN about this niche market, I'm like, you know what? I need to stop kind of saying this is going to be one of my niche markets and kind of helping, young people and old people and everything on the other side. And I just made the decision at that point to jump in full-fledged and say, you know what, I'm going to develop this market. I'm going to develop a service that caters exactly to it. And so at that time, kind of in September during our conference last year, I made the decision to just focus on young physicians. And so that's actually panned out really well. So the difference between 2015 and 2016 is I've raised my fees. I'm now for resident clients, I will still extend to them kind of maybe like a $69 a month retainer and a $500 upfront comprehensive financial plan because they're not making that much in residency. But once they're at the attending level, my fees jump up to anywhere between $9.99 to $24.99 for the comprehensive financial plan, and then $149 to $249 a month for the monthly retainers. And it fits really well. Given their income levels and what I've learned from them, they don't have any problems paying that. And so I made the fee adjustment, and then I've just really tried to ask the residents that I'm working with or at the residencies I'm speaking at, what is it that you want? What do you want to know more about? What kind of service model do you want? Things like that, just so I can understand them better. But kind of the takeaway that I've had in 2016 is the residents aren't so much on getting, a financial advisor on retainer just because it's hard for them to pay, but they do want answers and they do want education. And so what this has kind of spurred in me is I want to be building out, and I'm starting to work on this, an online course specifically for residents and how they can master their finances. Because with their busy schedules and everything they have going on, a model like that I think would work really well for them, to where they have to pay a few $100 to get access to something like this that is just going to walk them through step by step on everything financial, because they've never had a financial class. They don't know enough about it, but they're also kind of intimidated to start with a financial advisor because Wall Street has such a bad reputation, and it's really hard for them to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys up front. And so, I've gotten a lot of good feedback from that, and I have a few residents that I'm working with to try to get that up and running. So I'm really excited to get that started. And what that's kind of turning into is basically I'm only really working on the financial planning side with either third-year residents that are just about to jump into, their full career on the attending side, or those that are already attendings. And that works well for my revenue model. So from my perspective, I'm happy. And from them, they feel like, oh, I'm making $225 or more a year. I can totally afford this. And it wouldn't be unless for the fact that I've kept pushing on this niche and kept researching it and working with these folks that I wouldn't have been able to figure that out had I not done that.
So how many, or I guess what percentage of your clients are coming from the fact that you are, giving presentations at the local, to the local residents versus White Coat Investor versus kind of, I guess, referrals from existing client base? Like any idea kind of the breakdown of where clients are coming from at this point?
Yeah, so I'll give you the full breakdown. So I said I had seven total clients at the end of 2015. Right now, I'm already up to 21. So I've gotten 14 clients in the first half of the year, which has just been like great. It's like, wow, I doubled the amount of clients I took on from a year ago in just the first like 6 months of this year. Most of them are coming from White Coat Investor. That's just been a great source of referrals. I've gotten a couple clients from speaking at the residency programs, which has been great. And I think more and more are going to come from that because I'm talking to these residents when they're in their first and second year. So as they get to that third year stage, that's when they're starting to say, hey, I need help with this. Oh, and I remember, that Andrew guy, he spoke on this stuff and he seemed really honest and knew what he was talking about. So I'm going to call him. And so I'm starting to slowly get those calls in from residents I talked to this past year.
Were you able to leave them with an ebook or a white paper or anything in order to kind of stay top of mind for them? Or are you kind of relying on them to reach out to you in the end?
Yeah, what I did was a couple things. I try to always collect their email address and sign them up for my newsletter. So, their email address is gold in our industry. So that was kind of my first objective whenever I speak in front of a residency program. But secondly, I always upload my presentations to kind of a hidden link on my website so that they can go to my website and access the presentation, which is great because I'm like, now I've got them to go to my website and learn more about me and get more used to me. So that's been my strategy so far. I'm hoping to, again, build out more of that newsletter, online interaction with them, as this online course gets built out, just to constantly stay in front of them just through email marketing.
I love it because, if you came to me and you said, Alan, I work with young professionals and I want to write a book or I want to build a course, we'd be like, okay, well, it's going to have to be pretty broad. But when you come in and say, hey, Alan, I want to build a course for third-year residents that are going to be attendings next year.
Mm-hmm.
All right, suddenly we can actually design that, and it's so much more specific and easier to think through. We don't have to talk about all the different student loan programs out there. We can talk about what's life like when you have $250,000 in student loan debt, because that's what these folks are dealing with. They are not, they don't have $40,000 in debt with $40,000 in income, right? It's just a different world. So it can be so much more targeted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anybody could hear one clear statement from this podcast from me, it's that developing a niche is the best decision in the world you can make in this industry, especially if you're kind of developing that next generation firm, because it is how you stand out, but it's how you perfect your service model. It's how you perfect your pricing model, and it's how you perfect your marketing and all those things. When you do them efficiently, it makes your job so much easier. So why wouldn't you want that? But it's the fear of saying no or to stop marketing to clients that might have joined you had you not said you only serve that niche is the fear. And I get that fear, but man, once you take that leap, within a few months, you just start to see the rewards and the benefits of it that I don't think anybody would ever turn back.
Well, we obviously, frequent listeners know, we pound the niche marketing table. And honestly, this is why, because we're seeing just so many firms like yours that are taking advantage of the opportunities that are out there. There was a recent article published on Think Advisor by Angie Herbers that I think Kitsis and I are going to have to do a podcast rant about, because she was basically saying niche marketing doesn't work because big firms don't have niche markets, so they don't really need one. And I just kind of chuckled when I read that and thinking this whole, what got us here isn't going to be what necessarily gets us to where we want to go in the future. And your firm is a great example of when you're first starting out and you're looking to carve out, a focus group and you're looking to find a way in. If you're the generic financial planner that works with everybody, you probably don't get the opportunity to go speak to a bunch of residents. But when you're the expert for residents, suddenly you get to go position yourself as the expert for residents. And it's just amazing the compound effects that has.
Yeah, it kind of comes full circle, because it's the more you learn about them, the more they're going to want you, the more professional you sound in front of them, the more of an expert that you are just in their eyes. And it like you said, it compounds and it goes back and forth. And so what I know about doctors today is 10 times as much as I knew about them just a year ago, And so when I go speak in front of them, that confidence, it just comes out and they're like, wow, who's this guy? This guy knows his stuff. I want to work with him. So maybe I have a fat head there, but it's how it feels at times.
Well, that's the thing. When you become the expert and you feel like the expert, they're going to see that and they're going to recognize you for that expertise. So my next mission will be to somehow get you to launch like a podcast or write a book or something specifically to physicians, because I highly doubt that those exist out there right now. So
yeah, no, that'd be great. I'll miss your help for that.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to be on. We're going to close out with the final question that we do love, or that I love asking folks. And that is, if there's one piece of advice you wish you could go back and give younger Andrew, maybe this is the Andrew that was starting the firm or even further back, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
I think we've been talking about it for the last 10 minutes here. It really comes down to focus on that niche. Now, one thing that's interesting, I don't know if you ever read the book Breaking Through by John Bowen. It's talking about building a world-class wealth management business. And man, he wrote this, 10, 12 years ago. But it's a book I had read at the end of my time at my previous RIA. And in it, he talks about building a niche. He's like, the more you know about your specific market, the more, they're going to talk about you in that industry or profession. And it's just going to lead to easy referrals. And that's kind of what planted that seed initially. And like I said, I only went at it half-hearted. But then once, I went to the XYPN conference last fall and just kind of heard you guys talk about it more, heard so many on the podcast talk about it. I just saw that this is what I need to do. And so again, if I could have changed things, I would have started doing that from the very get-go and focused solely on that market. And maybe I could have been, a year further down the line that I am now. But, at the end of the day, I'm still happy with the progress I've made.
That makes perfect sense. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on. Congratulations with the soon-to-be new addition to the family. Tell your wife thank you for letting you away for an hour to be able to be on the podcast, because this was just super valuable. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be on here. I mean, it's the podcast that so many people that I've admired and respected have been on before me. So it's really an honor to be on here with you.
What an amazing story. Andrew's tenacity is understated by his sort of calm demeanor, but this is a wonderful example of just putting your head down and grinding away until he accomplished his goals. He and his wife, they went through hell, and to be able to come out on the other side and be doing the things that he's doing now is just nothing short of amazing. Now, be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.